Alright lads, it's the Meta Goblin here and welcome to my Frost Death Knight dual wield and two-handed PvP guide updated for 6.2. There will be a number of sections to this guide which can be accessed using the navigational bar above. We will be covering gearing, talents, glyphs, damage and utility, though if you subscribe to my channel you'll see many more videos covering more precise topics. Let's jump into the guide. First of all, we'll begin with the essentials in order to ensure your Death Knight is tuned up properly to maximise his pressure and usefulness in a PvP environment. The thing you need to understand about the stat priority when it comes to PvP is that you don't get much of a choice since there are only a certain amount of gear pieces that you can buy. But the main stats you want to focus on is Mastery, Versatility and then Haste. Mastery and Versatility increase a Death Knight's burst damage, but if you wanted to prioritise sustained damage then you'd want to go for Haste, though I feel increasing our damage outcome in short periods of time is more beneficial to a Frost DK because we are only in melee range for short periods of time most of the time, so we want to be able to do as much damage in that short window of time. Versatility also increases our survivability, which is also a very nice thing. On the screen now you'll see each piece you want to buy and equip. In dual wield we go for the force-set bonus since most of our damage is frost, whereas in two-handed it's mostly physical. This will also be featured in the description of the video. For two-handed you want to go for versatility and then haste. It's because two-hand doesn't benefit from frost damage as much as dual wielding, so we just want to go for flat-out damage. We go for haste more for more killing machine procs and just faster runes. Now let's run through the talents. In the first tier you want to go for Plague Leech and nothing else since this is the most major DPS increase and it's as simple as that. In the second tier the only option really is Lichborn since it's the most significant heal and it also removes certain crowd control on you, which happens a lot in PvP. The third tier is completely situational and depends what setup you are playing in Arena. Basically go for Asphyxiate when your setup doesn't have a lot of stuns like playing with a Warlock or a Hunter, but go for Chillblains when playing with a melee who has a lot of stuns like a rogue or a warrior. I'd recommend Death's Advance against a druid since you can't really slow druid very well, but only in duels or if you're carrying a flag in a rated battleground. In the fourth tier I'd recommend Blood Tap for a few simple reasons. You only need to regenerate your runes when you get a Killing Machine proc. Killing Machine proc is basically what all your damage is, but we'll talk about a bit more in the damage section. And basically with Blood Tap you have full control of when your runes regenerate, so with Blood Tap you can force your runes to regenerate to consume the Killing Machine proc and maximise your damage. Well, we'll talk about it more in the damage section, so don't worry about it too much now. Also, as a DK you're not going to be in melee range a lot of the time, so there's no point in you regenerating your runes when you're not in melee range, which means with Blood Tap you can regenerate your runes when you are there most needed basically. It also has a great synergy with Death Siphon since the spell requires Death Runes and Blood Tap generates Death Runes. So, in the fifth tier the only option really is Death Siphon since this provides the most sustained survivability. In the sixth tier, most of the time you want to go for Desecrated Ground, but in rated battlegrounds you will have to go for Gorfien's Grasp to mass script the enemy team into mass crowd control like Solar Beam or stuff like that. Remorseless Winter isn't really a PvP talent since guess what, players actually move and it's very difficult to actually get the stun going, so I wouldn't even bother with it. In the last tier I wouldn't recommend BOS for dual wielding since Frost Strike will likely result in more damage for you, but you may prefer it. Instead I recommend Necrotic Blight since this will mean you won't have to consume a rune to reapply your diseases. For two-handed you may prefer to go for BOS, but I'd avoid it in situations where you have to train a range target since it's difficult to actually keep the damage going on a moving target, and you're basically not benefiting from the actual damage of BOS if the target's just blinking around the spot and it's not really worth it. Now let's run through the glyphs. For Major I'd recommend both the glyph of Regenerative Magic and glyph of Anti-Magic Shell. I think they are both as good as each other, so I'm not going to tell you which one to favour. It probably just depends on what kind of fight you're up against. Glyph of Icy Touch is mandatory against healers with strong healing buffs and absorption etc. But for dual wield you may favour using Howling Blast instead because it's a strong DPS increase compared to two-handed. Glyph of Runic Power is completely mandatory due to how much it increases your DPS and allows you to continue to build up your pressure while not in actually being in melee range. Glyph of Dark Simulacrum is mandatory if you know you can still cast a crowd control like polymorph, spheres and cyclones. Icy Reaper is nice since this will increase your healing in the long run with Death Siphon. Glyph of Swift Death is mandatory when training a shaman since you can destroy the totems with Soul Reaper, a benefit from the speed and haste buff. The only minor glyph that gives any PvP advantage will be Glyph of Path of Frost since this reduces your fall damage. Now let's jump into damage. Frost relies on the mechanics of Killing Machine, which is a proc that gives Frostspec the majority of its DPS, so it's very important to learn how it works. The proc has a chance to occur on every melee swing, but that chance occurs again when you use a melee special ability like Obliterate or Frost Strike or anything like Plague Strike, anything. So Killing Machine can be consumed by either Obliterate or Frost Strike, and it's important to understand which ability to consume it with at certain times, and depending on whether you're dual wielding or using a two-handed weapon. For dual wielding, you want to prioritize consuming the proc with Frost Strike. But if the proc occurs when you have absolutely no runic power, then you use it with Obliterate. The opposite goes for two-handed. You want to consume the proc with Obliterate and avoid using it with Frost Strike. Another proc to learn is Rime, which has a chance to occur on every Obliterate hit and causes your Howling Blast to consume no runes. This obviously comes after consuming a Killing Machine proc, but it's a good time filler to wait for your actual proc to occur. For dual wielding, the idea of your rotation is to ensure that you only consume your Killing Frenzy procs with Frost Strike if you have runic power, which means you should have runic power. When you have runic power, instead of using Obliterates, you want to begin using your Howling Blasts instead, since this won't lose DPS by wasting a proc on Obliterate. So if you're just before building enough runic power to use a Frost Strike, then you start using your Howling Blasts instead of using an Obliterate, because you don't want a proc to occur and go and Obliterate and you just got enough runic power for Frost Strike. It's just like Frost Strike, so chilling there for too long, not getting a proc and not turning around to regenerate your runes. So yeah, that's how it works basically. I mean, this is primarily why Blood Tap is so useful, since you can build up runic power on demand to consume the Killing Frenzy proc with Frost Strike. So you get a proc, you don't have any runic power, but you have like 12 charges of Blood Tap. You can just start using the charges, spamming out the Howling Blast to build up the runic power, and then consume the Killing Machine proc with Frost Strike. You may think, Howling Blast is like complete DPS loss compared to Obliterate, but it's not really. Because Howling Blast does about half the damage of Obliterate, but it only consumes one rune, so it's a very close. When you consume 2 Howling Blasts, the damage is very close to 1 Obliterate. So let's talk through the rest. Remember to use Plague Leech whenever it's off the cooldown. And remember to fresh your diseases with either Outbreak, Howling Blast, or Plague Strike, so that you can use Plague Leech again, but also benefit from the dark damage. And the same goes for Soul Reaper, which you should be using every 6 seconds when the boss goes below 35% health. For two-handed, it's all the same, except for the fact that you don't consume your Killing Machine procs with Frost Strike, but you may have to if you have to wait too long to regenerate your runes. In two-hand, I like to store up my Blood Taps and wait until a Killing Machine proc occurs while I have absolutely no runes, and I just use the Blood Taps or a Plague Leech so I can consume the proc when it occurs. With Obliterate, so I'm only using Obliterate with Killing Machine most of the time rather than wasting it on a Frost Strike. Let's jump through all the cooldowns. So Pillar of Frost is best used when another proc occurs, like from your weapon or trinket, which is extremely likely to occur in the opener. Also, if your trinket is a non-use trinket, then you try to use it. Try to use them together, like with Pillar of Frost, but don't wait. Like 1 minute or 2 minutes for Pillar of Frost to come back or for the trinket to come back. Ideally, though, you should be using it once every minute. In Power Rune Weapon, you should only be using this in very desperate situations, like for instance when you have a Killing Machine proc but no runes or runic power. So basically, when you're in a situation where that Killing Machine proc is waiting long enough for another one to occur, therefore the first one is wasted, or long enough to literally just fall off. You may not like Blood Tap, and I completely understand you. It's a bit of a ball ache, so you may want to go for Runic Corruption. I can only see it becoming viable for two-handed, since you really need your runic power for damage in dual wield rather than just being a dump to get your runes back. But the idea is to only consume your runic power the precise moment 3 runes begin recharging while using Runic Corruption. Now let's run through the PvP utility at a Death Knight's disposal. The most important yet difficult ability to master in the game is Dark Simulacrum. You should always be using the glyph against a druid, mage or warlock, since these are classes that cast their crowd control, which you want to be stealing and using against them. Anti-magic shell is your most mage cooldown against spellcasters, so you want to be using it as late as possible, like below 25% health. Never waste it to use, to block crowd control if you are taking a lot of damage in a fight, but if you're not getting trained, then use it to defend yourself against CC and build up runic power. Icebound Fortitude should be treated the same as Anti-Magic Shell, your first priority being using it to keep yourself alive. Only pop it to pop yourself out of stuns if you're not being trained, or if that stun will actually kill you, or you're getting a lot of pressure and you cannot do anything because you're in a stun, in a smoke bomb or something like that. Asphyxiate or Strangulate, if you don't opt for the talent, should be used whenever it becomes available and should be chained up with your arena partner's crowd control. The idea of crowd control is to get a chain of crowd control going and keeping the healer in crowd control for as long as humanly possible while you deal as much damage as possible with your cooldowns. Remember, PvP is all about timing at the end of the day, Chains of Ice is your main gap closer next to Death Grip. Don't be afraid to use it in dual wield since most of your damage comes from Frost Strike, and remember you can also use Death Grip to interrupt casts that can't be spell locked by Mind Freeze. Paladin casts something on themselves and Priest do, but basically prevents you from spell locking them, so save in those situations you want to be using Death Grip to, make sure the cast doesn't get off. For Mind Freeze, just remember to use it as late in the cast as possible because you don't want to get juked or fake casted as they call it, which means you completely miss your Mind Freeze and the healer or DPS is free to cast all they want. Remember when you are dropping low in health and your healer is struggling due to being in crowd control over time, you should begin using your spamming your Death Strike, since this will provide near enough immortality with the correct rune control. I just want to finish off talking about crowd control breakers like the Trinket and Desecrated Ground. Make sure you don't waste abilities like this. You only want to be using them when you are extremely close to a kill or you desperately need to defend your arena partner, otherwise it's just a waste, so remember to be patient. I mean, if your target is at high health, like full health, there's no point actually using a CC breaker to stay on your target, It's best to save it for when you really need it. Anyway lads, that's the end of the guide. Stay tuned for my Unholy Death Knight PvP guide coming very soon after this one. My name is the Metagoblin, and until my next video, ciao!